Our speaker is going to be introduced by Nicole, who's our TB survivor and advocate who's been on this panel for a while now. Nicole Skaggs is a TB survivor and advocate affiliated with We Are TB. She's a volunteer patient advocate with TB Echo and works as a property manager. World TB Day marks the anniversary of her release from a 4-month TB isolation in 2023. I was her TB doctor, and I'm sorry about that, Nicole. And she's been on our TB Echo Survivor panelist since September 2024. Nicole, please take it away, and then we'll ask you to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Gesame. So I'm just going to go through our disclosures. Neither of us have any conflict of interest to disclose. And then our learning objectives. So our learning objective experiences into the development of person-centered treatment plans for TB and post-TB recovery, and define the impact of TB isolation on a TB survivor's experience to inform more empathetic and person-centered care models. So without further ado, I am very excited to introduce our speaker, Dana. Dana and her husband both had TB, and I actually met Dana through her daughter first. So her daughter joined us at We Are TB. We have a weekly support group, which is open to both survivors and families. So thank you to We Are TB for all of the work that is done. And that is available to all of your patients as for patients by patient support group. And I met Dana's daughter first while Dana and her husband were in treatment. Then eventually Dana joined us in support group as well. She's a regular member. And so from that, there I will take it away. Thank you for joining us, Dana.
Thank you, Nicole, and everybody on the panel. I really appreciate this opportunity because it means a lot to me to be able to reach out to anybody that has a loved one or is suffering through TB or just has questions about TB because it's not talked about much. So I'm also a survivor, as Nicole stated, and my husband was, and I'm very active with We Are TB.
And we're very lucky to have you. Dana has done some amazing advocacy in DC this year. And so I want to start with our first question. Can you tell us how your TB experience started and how the process of diagnosis went for you and your husband?
Yes. Back in January of last year, my husband started to get an infusion for a medical problem that he had, and he was being treated with just prednisone and methotrexate for several years. And it started to get worse, and he wasn't getting any relief. So I had already been on immune suppressant for many years for Behçet syndrome that I have, which is autoimmune. And the doctor said to him, prior to you starting this infusion, we need you to get a TB test. And if you're negative, then we can start your treatment. So he did, and it was negative. And he had 2 loading doses 2 weeks apart. And it was the best he had felt in 5 years. We were so excited because things looked like they were going to be so much better in the future for us. And he was looking forward to retiring in August last year. So it was going to be something to look forward to. And on February 4th, my dad had passed away. And I had just gotten a phone call. And then about 5 minutes later, my husband walked in the door and he wasn't feeling well. He had a fever and chills all day at work. And he didn't have to take sick time off for the rest of the week because he had bereavement. So we ended up going to the doctor later in the week, and they gave him a pneumonia shot after they did a chest x-ray. And this was to our rheumatologist because this was a doctor that we had that could pretty much do a lot of testing and blood work right in his office. So we had that done, and says, it just kind of looks like you have a little bit of pneumonia, not a real high grade fever, a little bit of chills, but let's just start here. And he said, it can't be TB because you tested negative. So we just went on about our days, and he ended up having to go back to work on that Sunday. Came home early again because he wasn't feeling well. That following week went back and forth to 2 different doctors, and he had a chest x-ray again, then he had a CT, and then he had a PET scan. By the time all those results came back, my husband thought he had cancer because he had had cancer when he was 50 years old. had just a routine colonoscopy with no symptoms. And he had a foot of his bowel taken out. Everything was great after that. Always had routine checkups every couple years, nothing. So 2 weeks went by. And then finally on Saturday, it was Saturday, the 22nd of February, I had him go into the ER. He was just too sick. He was having too many fevers and sweats every single night. And to us, we weren't even thinking about TB. I mean, he was really focused on cancer. And even when he went into the hospital and they admitted him, the doctors thought that, it was cancer also because of the way it was presenting in his lungs. And it looked like something was in his cecal area from the PET scan. So one of the pictures that you see that's been rotating is him standing in a hallway with one of his coworkers, and he really loved his job. He was a compassionate nurse, and it was a great job for our family. And anyway, he was in a regular room until about February. Let's see, from February 22nd until March 5th, they finally put him in isolation. So all that time, all they had been checking for was cancer. They were running TB tests, but nothing was coming back definitive for it, and the cultures take so long to grow. And this kind of stuff I didn't understand until I learned more about TB as the months went by. But anyway, he had to have a bronchoscopy, and that was on the 5th or 6th of March, and that finally said that, that the TB test was positive. And that's when he was finally put in isolation. And it was, he was, he was not very responsive. They had started him on the TB meds. They had finally put him on oxygen. The only medication he was on up until this point was Tylenol to keep his fevers down. And IV drips just for fluid because he wasn't eating. He had no desire to eat at all. No, he wasn't hungry ever. He was just very thirsty. And on Friday, the 7th, he told me he wanted me to go home because he was worried about me because I wasn't feeling well. I had started getting a low-grade fever. I couldn't talk because I was so upset the whole time that we were in the hospital together, because I would stay with him all day, go home and sleep a few hours, and then come back. After that, Saturday morning, I went to the doctors, and a doctor called me from the hospital and said, I want to get John out of this hospital. I think he could be better treated at another hospital. So he made it possible to transport my husband to another hospital, where he immediately was put into ICU isolation. They had him hooked up to everything. And unfortunately, Sunday morning, the 9th, my husband coded. And after that, he was not going to be himself. He was on a ventilator. He had cracked ribs from him bringing him back to life. He was down for 3 to 4 minutes. And this is what led to my TB result. And what happened was, the nurse that was taking care of him in the ICU there said, you know what, if you were my mom, I think I'd want you to go into the ER to get checked out too, because you've been with him this whole time. He's had active TB, even though it took so long to discover it. So the next day I said, I need to go home and sleep tonight, because we had basically just stood over him all day long, just, my whole family just pretty shaken up. And so Monday morning, the 10th, I was immediately admitted. I went in the ER, and they put me right into isolation because they knew about my husband. And on the 11th, I started on a full regimen of TB medication. And while my husband was in ICU on the ventilator, I was in an isolation room on the full regimen of the TB meds, all the 4 main ones, the rifampin, pyrazinamide, isoniazid, and ethambutol. So that's where my journey started as far as TB, even though it didn't show that I was positive for TB. So.
That's
Mm.
that's quite a difficult journey. How did that TB journey impact your family?
It was really hard. I called my daughter on the Friday before, and I said, if you and Ryan can get here, you better, because Dad's not getting any better. He's getting worse. And she had talked to him during the week, and she was all excited because she got to show him her engagement ring just over his, FaceTiming. And that day he had a really good day, and he ate like a half a sub, which was the first time he ate. And the whole time he ate, he was in the hospital. So I was like, wow, is he turning around? And um, but then so she and Ryan hopped in a car and they drove all the way from Fargo, North Dakota. Luckily, my son and daughter-in-law lived just about 20 minutes from the hospital. So during that time, they kept my dog, so I could be, because I had to be in the hospital, and my neighbors took care of my cats. And his mom went to stay with my sister-in-law because we were worried she was going to have a heart attack. I drove her to the hospital when we got the news about him coding, and she took extra pills that morning and was shaking all the way to the hospital. We both were, because we just never anticipated, him going, coding from the TB. So, and all of his organ failure because of not getting, in my mind, not getting the right care early enough to really treat his TB, with them focusing so much on cancer. And then he was never treated for cancer anyway. They just kept checking things.
Wow.
So it was difficult, but my kids were able to stay. Their jobs let them, work from the hospital. All my kids were working from the hospital remotely. So they were my advocates. They came to my room and to my husband's. And a chaplain came to both of our rooms. And now I'm like best friends with the chaplain from the hospital. We've become such close friends.
Wow. I know I got the privilege of meeting your daughter, and she was a wonderful advocate for you guys.
Yeah, I learned about We Are TB because of Emily getting involved with, she remembered that she had had a professor from Wayne State, and his name is Jonathan Stillo, and he's very involved with TB advocating. And he at one time was in Romania working with TB patients. And he came back over here, and my daughter took one of his classes, and she remembered that. So she reached out to him and got so much information from him to help her know what to ask the doctors, because they let my daughter do rounds with them every morning. So she was on the MyChart every day, just looking through things, and MyChart, also looking at my blood work every day. And but during that time in isolation, it just was, it was very, very difficult because I couldn't be with my husband. The whole time I had to just be in my room. I couldn't go out the doors. Anybody that came into my room had to totally put on PPE equipment. And it just is so strange because when he was in the other hospital, that was never even considered. He was not in isolation for 2 weeks, so it's all the people that he could have infected, including my family. And luckily everyone that was with my husband since Thanksgiving of 24 had to get tested, anybody that was around him. And everybody came back negative. And some did a blood test, some did the skin test. And that was another thing that bothers me about the hospitals is today, they don't do a TB test every day, every year now. In the old days, my mother-in-law said that, because she was a nurse also, that they used to not only test you for TB, but they used to do a chest x-ray every year. So, so here we are. He's in isolation and I'm in isolation with just my kids doing the best that they can to get by. So
Heartbreaking that they had to go through that and that it impacted your family so much.
right.
Were you able to find out where that TB actually came from?
Yes. Later on, when I had to continue my TB treatment after isolation, I went to the Wayne County Healthcare because that's who would supply all the medication. And during that time, Dr. Sundstrom, who was the head of the TV in Wayne County there, came in and said, I think we've narrowed it down. We've gone through all of your husband's records and all the patients he's been taking care of over these years, and they were able to trace it back to 2017, where he had taken care of a patient who had active TB. My husband was notified, and my husband had to take a TB test, and it came back negative. The doctor asked me, did your husband tell you that he was around a patient? And I said, no, this is new to me. I've never heard this. He said, well, he did get tested after, and it was negative. But the way that they determined that it was definitely that patient was they were able to compare my husband's DNA strain of TB to that patient's strain. And it was exactly the same. Because I guess that's how they do it. When they grow all those cultures, that's how they can tell it's so important with contact tracing.
Wow. That's really tough that they didn't catch that earlier. What do you wish providers knew about what it's like for both patients and their families going through TB treatment?
I wish I know that everything is so underfunded, and it's a miracle that there's as many people that do get treated and can live a totally normal life, because TB is 100% treatable if they can get the right medication and the time that it needs to be done. I wish that they knew more about We Are TB or Partners in Health, or just making other doctors, especially like today's World TB Day, and it's not something that they're going to go out and talk about, because it's a disease of the old time, like polio. And I had an aunt that had TB, and back then she was in a sanitarium for a year. My doctor that took care of me actually worked at that sanitarium, and my doctor that I had was about 90 years old, but he was still doing it because he believes, in the treatment and the care of the patients. So I wish more had the knowledge of, making that one of their first thoughts. Maybe we should check for TB. And I wish that more funding would go into better testing, because this testing is it's so old too. Just having the skin test. My husband had the skin test and the blood test, and it didn't show that it was positive, because when you have an immune suppressant in your body, it doesn't allow your immune system to show that you have TB. It's all suppressed. And that's how they can tell if you have an infection from something. And that allows your body to fight something off. They think he had latent TB for 8 years, because he was never on, he was totally healthy up until he had the PMR, but it wasn't, the particular drugs that he was on wasn't enough to make it active in his body. And another thing is, if they can discover more people that have latent TB that you've had in your body where you're not contagious, you can be treated so much easier and quicker, and the drugs don't hurt you as badly. When you have active TB, you have to be on so much more of a long regimen, as I did. And one of the reasons mine was so long, I was treated for 8 months, and from other stories that I've heard, a lot more people, including your own, had to be in, treatment for even longer. And it's awful, but it works. But my medicine, they had to switch around a little bit, because when I was in the hospital, the rifampin made me really, really sick, and it caused my liver enzymes to really shoot up. So they had to take me off that. I had to have a break for a few days, and they switched me to a sister drug called rifabutin with all the other ones. And then eventually, after several months, I was able to just be on the 2 drugs, isoniazid and rifabutin. And you constantly go back and forth to the clinics. You get your medication handed to you when you first start out, when they watch you take your pills. And then eventually when they build up some confidence and know that you're going to take your medication, which of course I was going to, I already saw what my husband was going through and I didn't want my kids to have to go through it again. Um, but I was finally able to stop my treatment on October 31st of last year on Halloween. And another thing I think that they could do is maybe reach out just one time, say, hey, how have you been feeling since you stopped your treatment? Because once you're done, that's it. There's no follow-up letter. There's no phone call from the nurse that you talk to every single day for months.
Yeah.
And it would be just a nice comforting feeling, to know that, yeah, they still care instead of just being kind of like a number.
Yeah.
Once you're done, that's it. So, there's so many different things that I could bring up. And the one thing I will say is that my husband, they did so many tests on my husband, and the hardest part about him being in the hospital was not only me not being able to be with him when I was out of isolation, I was so sick that sometimes I couldn't be with him.
Yeah.
So when I came home, I felt terrible. So my kids were there all the time, especially my son. And my son was really having a hard time letting go because we knew through the MRIs and the EEGs that my husband had no conscious being. If he lived, he was not going to be who he was. He would have to be 100% care. And I know my husband being a nurse, he would not want to live like that. So it's pretty sad when you have to convince your son to let go of his dad, and he was so looking forward to him being a grandpa. In fact, my kids now are starting to try for a family. And yeah, we're excited about that. And I am too now. And, we're moving on. And the blessings that I have with my husband is that we did have a great relationship. I loved him having his job because he worked the typical 8-hour shift so he could do stuff with the kids, be it all their sport events, their choir events, and going on the school trips, which, a lot of parents can't do today. But that was a priority for us, and we did it a lot. And so it's been hard, but I'm okay. Okay. And my kids are okay. And I want so much more awareness out there and stigma to be gone, because they feel like I have a best friend and she's still my best friend, but it's just the ignorance of people that keep them from learning. She didn't want to come. My husband, well, first off, I should say that he died on April 22nd. So it hasn't been a year yet. We took him off a ventilator, and but he lived for 4 days off a ventilator, which surprised us all. He passed away when I left the room to go down and meet the nurse to take my pills.
Oh
And I know that happened. Same thing happened when my mom passed away years ago when I left, and my stepmother, same exact thing. But other circumstances, of course. But he lives on in all our lives. My whole house is decorated in scuba and turtles, and we were avid scuba divers. We were supposed to go to Curacao last year, and we had to cancel that because he was really sick at that time, and we knew that, we didn't know what was going on, but we knew that he wasn't going to be well enough. And that's one of our scuba diving pictures. And that was us actually in Bonaire a couple years ago. So we've been diving all over, and I said that I'm going to take him diving everywhere I go. I don't know if you can see it, but I have a special ring here that's actually a turtle. And I have a little bit of his ashes in there. So every time I go diving, he's going diving with me.
Beautiful.
And I have a turtle tattoo, his signature also into the turtle. And because it means longevity and endurance and love. And that was barefoot on the beach in Grand Cayman.
Oh.
We got married there it'll be 32 years this May,
Oh my God.
on the beach. He proposed to me underwater while we were scuba
Oh,
diving and said, "Marry me and make me the happiest man in the sea."
oh,
And it truly was and is still in my heart the most beautiful day we ever had, and then I had my kids, and it can't be much better than that. I mean, of course, if I had him here with me today, but I know he is. He's definitely watching over me and my family. And
absolutely.
I know that he's encouraging me to do this too, because it's my way to give back so other people don't have to go through it. If I can help one person,
Yeah,
that makes all the difference in the world.
that's a very, very impactful story, Dana. And if you shared with me kind of how you celebrated his life recently. Would you share that with the group?
I will. Actually, during our memorial service that we had shortly after he passed, because my kids hadn't taken their honeymoon yet and we're going to Hawaii. So I wanted to have all that kind of done so that they could go and not have to come home to that sadness. So we had a beautiful memorial service for him. And during that time, I got up and I spoke after the service was over and said that I was going to take John scuba diving one more time. And not just the ring, but I had my husband cremated. And what I did was I took my whole family to Grand Cayman and we stayed back at the hotel or the condo where my husband and I had previously stayed. And the dive master that we had at the same time took us out on his boat, which you can see. It's my daughter-in-law, my son, me in the middle, my daughter, and her boyfriend. And I'm holding his ashes in a beautiful dissipating urn. So when it goes into the water, after a while, it just kind of disintegrates. And it's a way to give back to the ocean that's, not going to cause any damage. So I'm in the water and I'm getting ready to descend. And when I do get down to about 80 feet, you can see that the ashes just dispersed everywhere. And then the box kind of starts to float away from it. And that also will deteriorate over, a couple hours. And then there was just a dive master down with me. And my kids just kind of, said goodbye, Dad, before we went down. And we finished the dive out. It was a 45-minute dive. And then we went down, I went about 104 feet. He let go at about 80.
Oh,
We finished the dive and I serviced and, I was back on the boat with my kids. And it was a beautiful memorial. And I got to do what I said I wanted to do. And my kids got to do it with me. So it was a great experience and I'm going to continue to do it. I want to advocate and I want to dive and someday be a grandma. So
oh,
that's what I look forward to now.
I love that. That is such a beautiful way to remember him, and
Thank you.
it's amazing. And I'm sure he'll be looking over those soon-to-be grandbabies.
Yes, he will. He certainly will.
With that, I think we'll open it up to questions. Lana,